Hello everyone and welcome. Welcome to the online seminar series of TÜBİTAK Research Institute for Fundamental Sciences. In order to mitigate the demoralization effects associated with COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak, which unfortunately continues to evolve in the world, we organize inspiring online seminar series for national and international audiences in various branches of fundamental sciences, as well as in interdisciplinary areas. Today, we have a very special speaker, internationally well-known expert in the field, Dr. Luca Ghiringhelli from Fritz Haber Institute of Max Planck Society in Germany. He's going to talk about artificial intelligence for data-driven material science, small data and interpretability. The talk is part of our interdisciplinary seminar series. At the end of the talk, we will have a section for questions, which can be asked by sending a message through chat button or just raising hand. Luca Ghiringhelli graduated from the Polytechnic University of Milan and received Italian laurea in nuclear engineering, specializing in material science. Then in 2006, he received his PhD at the University of Amsterdam. Later on, his life world line passed through different grants, such as Alexander von Humboldt Research Fellowship, European Commission Nomad Novel Material Discovery Center for Excellence grant, and finally he became a group leader at the Fritz Haber Institute of Max Planck Society. Luca, thank you for accepting once again our invitation and joining us. With all this, I want to hand over the word to you to begin your talk, please.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. I hope I can be inspiring. It's quite of a challenge. And so I think I will start by sharing my screen. And then I think you can see now my slide, my initial slide, right? Okay, so the seminar series is interdisciplinary. So just to frame a little bit where I am, this is about material science, so predicting material properties with artificial intelligence. I start with a little bit of introduction on the terminology. So there is this big hype about big data-driven science, and this terminology was introduced quite some time ago in 2007. Probably was the first time Jean Grey realized that we are probably facing what he called the fourth paradigm in science, where the first paradigm would be empirical science prior to the introduction of the scientific method in the early 17th century. And then probably many people would agree that another paradigm arose when computers were used to make prediction in science, in physics at the beginning, and then overall in different fields of science. And probably nowadays, with the introduction of big data analytics, we are facing a yet new paradigm. Some people could be curious on what is big in the data. So experts say that there are four different characteristics for the data to be big. So the kind of easy one is volume. So when one here big, the first thing that comes to mind is there are a lot of data. But that's not the only parameter. There could be also the velocity at which the data are transmitted and stored and retrieved. So that's an issue also that makes them big. What is more interesting, at least in my field, is the variety of these data. So that is a way to say that there is a certain complexity in the data. We do calculations of different properties with complicated workflows, and we want to have the data achievable and can be reached and used to make some kind of good analysis. And we have the issues of veracity, so that the data that are used to do the analysis are actually trustful at several levels. I stay a little bit with terminology in order to kind of frame a little bit where I am. And so we have the big field of artificial intelligence that is a kind of old discipline. It started in the half of the last century with algorithms that try to mimic the human intelligence. So initially it was like decision trees, if-then rules. And then later machine learning started and also compressed sensing. This is one thing I will talk about later. So a subset of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And the important thing to understand in machine learning is that the learning stays for the fact that the algorithms improve by construction with more data. And a subset of all this is deep learning that actually will not really touch today. So deep neural networks and so on are a subset of machine learning. Now, let me start a bit provocative, saying that it's not that new that science is data-driven, right? So there is this big data in front of data-driven, but you also have seen in my title that I say small data. So let me come to this a little bit in steps. So imagine like as a kind of thought experiment that you know, in some way trajectories of planets in the solar system. I'm just going historical a little bit to introduce why I think that we are not doing anything much new with the data-driven science. And this could come from accurate observations or because you have numerically solved some general relativity equations. And then you fiddle with the data, and if you are genius like Kepler, you understand that there is an extremely nice regularity between the cube of the semi-major axis of the orbits and the square of the orbital period of the planets. And mind that Kepler had data only until Saturn. So 6 data points, straight line. And this is one of the 3 laws of Kepler. And so this is purely data-driven, right? And then after some decades, Isaac Newton came with a law that explains why this empirical observation is true. Now, mind that, oops, this should not happen. Okay. Also Newton's law is empirical, right? So it's simpler because you can derive the Kepler's law, but it's also empirical. It doesn't explain why gravity works like Newton wrote it down. It's just a simpler law than Kepler's law. Closer to material science is another very dear example, that is the periodic table of the elements. And this is the second version by Mendeleev himself, in which, so Mendeleev understood that if you table the data, so the known chemical elements by the way they would react with oxygen and hydrogen, so the stoichiometry of the reaction of the stable molecule forming, and then ordering them by atomic weight. Of course, they didn't know anything about atomic number at that time. he realized that there is some periodicity, right? So these things repeat over and over a few times. And the amazing thing is that Mendeleev could predict that there were missing elements. So these two missing spots were predicted by Mendeleev and later on were identified, say, as gallium and germanium. So what we would like to do these days is well, the periodic table of element is known, but what we have, we don't have a good simple way to navigate is the periodic table or charts of materials properties. So the motivation of my work is in my group is to try and understand if we can produce maps, charts of materials properties by looking into the data in the most unbiased possible way. So a little bit of a roadmap for today's talk is that I will show something about learning predictive and interpretable maps of materials properties with a focus on the fact that we can use small data to make this prediction and interpretation. And then something a bit more advanced in which we do diagnostic on learned models by using another artificial intelligence technique. So artificial intelligence on top of artificial intelligence in order to understanding what we are doing. And then I will have a final comment on reproducibility and the so-called fair practices for data handling. So let me start with the learning predictive interpretable maps. And the general idea of these maps is as simple as this. So what I have in mind is really having some kind of cartographic map, like nations or territories on a cartographic map, in which materials lay down such that materials with similar properties are all together in the same nation. So this would be an example. I will come back later about octet binaries. So some binary materials that would crystallize either as rock salt or Zimbblend. And then some examples that I will actually not really touch later, but just to have a kind of a cartoon. So some materials could be metals or insulators. Some could be topological insulators versus trivial insulators. And as you see, the common denominator of these plots is that it's a two-dimensional plot, and just to be clear, it's two-dimensional because it's nice to put on a slide a two-dimensional plot, but it could be a higher dimensional map, what I will show how to derive. And there is this mysterious D1, D2 on the axis, prime, second prime, and so on. And the idea is that we would like to find this descriptor so that we have that this axis have some coordinates, and we can label the coordinates, and we call these descriptors, and we can look into these descriptors. Another example of a map. And this is, say, the firstborn in our lab, the first map of octet binaries that was actually produced with the methodology that I'm going to explain in the next slide. So this is just to show that where we are going to. So a little bit of mathematics now. The technology that I'm using is a combination of compressed sensing and symbolic regression. Let me go to explain what this means step by step. So let me start with some property, so a scalar property of a material, say some formation energy, some band gap or something like that. And as typical in physics, I start by expanding the property over a basis set, right? This you can always do. If you have a good basis set, this may work. So how do I construct a good basis set? Well, this is the part that I don't know. So let me be completely wild about the creation of the basis set. I start from some ingredients. Later I will show some electron affinity and ionization potentials of the atoms that constitute the material. And then I construct nonlinear functions of these features. And I construct a lot of them. Each of these functions is a basis function. And now my requirement is that I would like to express my property as a linear combination of as few as possible of these basis functions. Where the catch is that I identify which basis functions matter the most. In mathematical terms, this requires to minimize the, say, prediction error. So I write my property as a linear combination between my descriptor matrix, the column of this metric are this D1, D2, and Dn, times some coefficient. But then I say that the number of coefficients that are different from 0, that mathematically is written by this norm 0, is as small as possible. So I pay a penalty every time a coefficient is different from 0. If I put together this thing and I try to minimize, what I find is a solution to this system such that the number of non-zero coefficients in this expansion is as small as possible. So at the same time, I find some basis function that matter the most. And I also find a good prediction of my property. It is essentially what I need to construct my maps. So how do I construct these basis functions? I start from this property and just combine them with some elementary operators like sums, absolute modulo of the difference, say exponentials, powers, and then I construct a tree like this one. This means that I do this difference divided by this sum here. And this gives me the possibility to construct expressions like this. And I construct a lot of them. Now it's time to say what I mean by a lot. A lot means that at the moment we can treat billions or even several billions or 10 to the power 10 or 11 of these properties. And the nice thing of this technology that is called compressed sensing is that I can have 10 to the 9, 10 or something of these columns in my matrix, but only few rows, say 100, 500, something like that. And under the constraint that I find a solution with only few coefficients that are different from 0, I still find a stable solution. This sounds like magic, but it can work. So the way we find the solution, I have only one slide on the actual methodology that we introduced in my group. It's called CISO, thanks to the work mainly of Runhaio Yang, that was a postdoc with me and now a professor in Shanghai. And so the way we solve this equation is by iterative construction, by projecting this candidate basis function that we have here onto the property. This gives us some residual, and then we find features that project maximally onto the residual. The catch is that we find a subset of properties that project maximally on the property and a subset that project maximally on the residual. And then we enumerate all possible solutions inside this subset of properties. So we go from 10 to the 9, 10 to the 10 to say 1,000 or less. And then we find the optimal solution among these few selected features. And this is again, this kind of first solution that we have. And we have the octet binaries. So this material crystallizes either as rock salt or zinc blend. On this side here, you have a carbon diamond. And you have to read this diagram in this way. The farther you are from this green line, that is where the two materials, where the two phases, rock salt and zinc blend, coexist. The farther you are from this line, the more stable you are as a zinc blend on this direction and as rock salt on this direction. So here you have the rock salt materials and here the zinc blend, and the carbon diamond is the strongest zinc blend, and other known like boron nitride and borophosphide that are very strong zinc blend material with respect to the rock salt phases. And here what we mean by interpretable, we have simple expression on the axis, as simple as they get by the minimization procedure. And we can relate, so the leading factor here, for example, is this difference between ionization potential electron affinity that is related to the band, to the homolumo gap in the atom. The B is always the cation in, the anion in our A-B octet binary, and then some other properties. I will have more example on this, so I will not spend much time on this. That is a kind of trivial example to some extent. What I would like to show is that the methodology that we introduced tells how complex should be the formula. By complex, we mean at the same time how many dimension the map should have in order to give a good prediction, but also how complicated really should the expression on the axis be. And this is done by the so-called cross-validation. Now, I don't go into detail. The idea is to train different models by changing the data that are used for training and then test them on data that were not used for training. And what we find is this. Okay, I don't see one part of the plot. These two lines are two different complexity of my formula. So let's say the green line is a formula medium complex, and the orange line is more complex formulas. And we see that from green to orange, we improve just a little bit the prediction error. What is clear is that we need 3 dimensions to minimize our error, and this would be the optimal dimension of our map. So as a summary of what this introduced compressed sensing with the symbolic regression methodology that we have introduced, so to frame it a little bit in a wider context, we can say what we are doing is regularized regression. So we are doing regression that is essentially in this formula. The regularization is the fact that the number of non-zero coefficients in the expansion is as small as possible. So this is this so-called massive specification. It's a dimensionality reduction. So we start from a huge number of dimensions and we single out the dimensions that matter the most. So this is a much wider field, the field of dimension reduction. And the catch here is that we have supervised a dimensionality reduction. Typically is unsupervised. I don't explain too much now what this means. If you want to know, just ask me later. And also we have descriptors on the axis. So the dimension that we extract can be read so inspected, while typically in dimension reduction, this is not possible. So in this also a feature selection or extraction with something that is a non-greedy solver. So let me just claim this. If you want to know more, I can specify. And we are doing a symbolic regression with a deterministic solver, because I specify this because almost all symbolic regression prior to our introduction of the method was using genetic algorithms, so a stochastic solver. Now, symbolic regression is living a kind of renaissance. If you go to archive, you will find a lot of papers doing symbolic regression with neural networks. We don't use neural networks, we use this compressed sensing. And so we will see where the future goes. Okay, one thing I didn't mention is that the method, the algorithm, the solution algorithm by construction is massively parallel also. So it could be quite demanding to run on a laptop, but it's perfectly scalable on supercomputers. So this is a very nice property of this kind of algorithm. Okay, now let me go a bit further, and I would like to introduce what we call multitask learning. So we would like to find at the same time descriptors, so our axes on the map, that are good for several properties at the same time, in order to have only one map for different properties. Why this could be interesting? Okay, let me show a little bit the position of the problem. So we have several properties, property 1 up to NT. And then we are looking for, again, this linear construction where the property K is descriptor times some coefficient CK, but there is no K in the descriptor. This is because there is only one descriptor for all the properties. Now, what I explained before could be called single task CISO. The idea is to extract columns in our matrix capital D And these are extracted by the coefficients that are different from 0 in our linear system, right? Now, what we do is we have a lot of systems, one for each property, P1, P2, Pn, and we want to select the same columns, right? We want to have the same descriptor. The training coefficients could be different. There is a raised hand. I don't know if I should try to reply now or we keep all the questions to the end. I'm not so sure. Alikram?
Yes.
There is a raised hand. I don't know if this should be addressed now or...
Let us please at the end of the talk.
Okay, so let's have it at the end. Okay, so I was saying we have different properties and we want to single out the same descriptor. And this is shown graphically here. And the gray rows here indicates a very interesting feature of this position of the problem. That is, we don't need to have the property for all the points in the data set, for all the material in our case in the data set. So you may know the property for some, so those that are colored here in some color that is not gray, but for some other materials, you don't know the property. Still, you could find a good descriptor that predicts everything at the same time. So it's a good strategy also to fill the gaps in incomplete databases, let's say. Where did we apply this thing? Well, we implemented this because we were after phase diagrams where we have more than 2 phases in the same diagram. And we wanted to have the same axis on the diagram. So let's say that instead of Roxel-Zimblend, we also now have only Roxel-Zimblend. Now we have Roxel-Zimblend and say the cesium chloride phase, and we can build a phase diagram with 3 phases. Actually, we went up to 5 phases for these octet binaries. So this is the general formula now for the solution. Oh, let me skip this one. Let's go to our solution. And we have a phase diagram for octet binaries where we have now 3 areas, also a small area for cesium chloride. And the solution gives us much more than just the area in which each material is more stable. We can go through a cut here. So that is represented here, where we have basically what would be here, the axis, the vertical axis popping out of the screen. And we have the different phases. So if we walk along this line, we would go from the cesium chloride to the Roxol to the Zimblend, but we also notice that the nickel arsenide phase is not far away from say, the rock salt in this area here. So we may want to check if also the nickel arsenide phase could be possible. Okay, so also here we have that this methodology use small data. When I say small data, I want really to underline that we use, say, 100, maybe few hundreds data points, while the typical machine learning efforts, they typically use thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands if you go to deep learning. So we make the best use of the data with a somewhat simple model. Now I show 2 kind of cutting edge applications that use actually a variant of our methodology that is called, that is the classification part of CISO. Until now, I was talking about regression, so a continuous property. Now we look into classification. And the position is very similar. We just have to find a slightly different cost function. So we are after constructing maps in which points belonging to different properties land in different territories, and there is no overlap. And this is what we impose to our minimization here. So the application, one of the most notable, or probably so far the most notable, is the improvement of the so-called Gauss-Schmidt tolerance factor for predicting perovskite stability. So this is the slide that you have seen in the poster announcing this talk. And what we wanted to do is to see if we could do better than this empirical formula found by Gauss-Schmidt essentially 100 years ago in basically Kepler's style. So he put together data, he had some idea, and then he found this good formula that predicts to some extent whether materials would crystallize at perovskites or not, materials with this chemical composition. So this is the Goldschmidt accuracy, Goldschmidt tolerance factor accuracy. If this T is between these two values, Goldschmidt says you form a perovskite. The accuracy of this is not bad, but can be improved. So we ran our machinery and we found a slightly more complex formula, but using exactly the same ingredients. So the so-called Shannon radii of the atoms. And we have the oxidation state that looks like an extra information, but actually is used also for determining the Shannon radii. So if you want to know more, I can be more specific. But the catch is that we have this equation that is slightly more complex than Goldschmidt, and has a higher accuracy if we just split with a kind of sharp step at this value here. But if we allow a little bit of leeway and we say, well, we say that stable perovskites are here and clearly non-stable perovskites are here, the accuracy goes up. This is not just trying to dress a little bit better what we have. We have an extra property here. We have a one-dimensional map, and we have a continuous monotonic probability increasing from actually decreasing from 100% probability to be stable perovskite to 0 probability to be stable perovskite continuously in this range. So we can construct materials maps like this one. So let's say that we fix what is the atom X here to oxygen, and we fix also the oxidation number of the big anion, cation. And we explore the space of radii for the two cations. And we see that we have probability to form a perovskite stable. So 0 is low and blue is high. And the plotted data points are those that are confirmed from experiment. Not only, we can go a step forward and say, we have double perovskites in which we have two different cations in the B position, so called B and B prime. And if we use as radius in this formula the average of the two radii of the two expression of the two materials, we find a map for double perovskites. Actually, these are two different with cesium or lanthanum. And we confirm what is known experimentally, but we predict thousands unknown double perovskites that are stable. And the next example actually predict millions of new materials. This is the case of tetradymite. And it's a material with this general formula, AB LNM, where AB could be these three elements and LNM could be these three elements. They form these stacked layer structures. And we were trying to see if we can predict whether these are topological insulator or trivial insulator by just looking at one of these units and then doing kind of a mixture model to model the layering. So the CISO learning identified a very good descriptor to split perfectly between topological insulator and trivial insulators once given the formula. So once you know A, B, and LMN, you have this descriptor on the two axes that predicts exactly whether if you will form a trivial or a topological insulator. And the input information is just the atomic number here, Z, A, B, and so on, and the electronegativity chi for M and N. So this formula is you see, is quite nice and symmetric, AB and then LM, and then you have this difference with, again, AB and LM, so it doesn't depend on, for example, the N. And this comes out from the algorithm. We didn't impose any symmetry. So this descriptor was selected and it proved to be a very good one. Then we exploit this model by just saying, okay, now let's construct layer materials by just having some kind of fractional occupation of the sites, and we can kind of scan the whole material space that has millions of possibilities. Well, actually infinite, but we coarse-grained or we discretized X and Y, A and B to some fixed points in order to have the supercells of finite size. And these are the points that were actually tried with DFT calculations, and they were always predicted correctly by our model. So now the challenge is up for the experimentalists to produce this material and see if indeed you can have all these new topological insulators out there. Okay, let me switch a bit gears now, and I go to a bit more advanced method in terms of concepts that are introduced. And what I'm introducing now is subgroup discovery, and I will tell in a few slides where we apply it. So in order to understand what's going on, consider that you have some kind of, some data points here. We don't deal with so few data points, it's just a cartoon. And imagine that you plot these data points as a property 1 versus property 2, anything you like. And you see, and you try to make a linear regression among these data points, and you see this kind of trend. But you also notice in this very simple case that if you split into subgroups the data points, and you now do the linear fit, not only you have a better agreement with the data points, but the trend of the local model is completely different from the what happens to the global model. Now, again, think that this is just a cartoon. One would not sponsor to do the linear fit with 3 data points and say this is better than with 6. Let's go to a slightly more elaborate example, and let's say that we have so many data points. And so we have a population, and we have some target property P, and we have some features here. So this is only one. And you try to make some kind of a good fit of this data. And this is the best maybe one can do with this cloud of points. And you say, well, maybe I'm not satisfied. You may notice that if you focus in this area of the descriptor, you have a much better fit, especially if you do a horizontal line here. So if the value of the descriptor is smaller than 0.2, you would have a much better prediction for these data points than for the whole model. Further, you may also use another feature that here is kind of symbolized by 2 different symbols on the plot, squares and circles. And then you may notice that if you focus on the circles and you have that the value of the feature D1 is bigger than a certain threshold, you have also a good fit with the horizontal line. So now imagine that you have tens, hundreds of these features, and you want to search all the combinations of these features in order to find subsets that have a simpler model than the global model, or some outstanding characteristic of the properties of the data points with respect to the other models. Of course, you would not like to do that manually by browsing all the pairs or the triplets and so on. You want to have an automatic method to do that. And this is what we are doing now with subgroup discovery. I will not go at all into the way the method works. I want just, the method just finds these spatial subgroups automatically by just defining how they should look like in terms of some abstract properties that the researcher designs. So let me be specific. And this is a recent paper that is still in press, but you can still, you can already find it in ChemArchive. And so what we are after here, the target property was predicted absolute errors of some machine learning models. So that's why at the beginning I said we are a level of abstraction higher. So we have some machine learning model, and we would like to understand not much how good they are globally. That is the typical analysis that people do in order to compare machine learning models. But where the model perform better or worse in the data space. So in our case, it's always the material space. So that means that some of the machine learning models could perform better for some materials and other could perform better for some other material. Imagine that you can know beforehand which model perform better for which one. So you could kind of select which model, or if you know that your model is not performing better for some materials, you may zoom in and check why this happens and try to improve your model. Okay, so what we do is try to find the subgroups of our data points that, first of all, are not that small. So this is a condition that we always ask to our subgroups, because otherwise you always end up to 1 point per subgroup. And then we also want that the difference between this absolute error, actually use the relative absolute error for a technical reason, between the whole population and the subgroup, this difference is maximized. So what we have is that we have a training set, we have machine learning model, and then we identify what we call the domain of applicability. So where our model has particularly small prediction error. So this is just, again, a cartoon in which there is a small area in which our very simple model in this case is performing particularly well. And you want to identify these regions without calculating the model itself. So you just look at some features of the material and you say, this model will perform better here. What we used here was the data that were used a couple of years ago for the so-called Kaggle competition. That was a hugely successful competition in machine learning for material science, where almost 1,000 groups competed to make the best model for this kind of materials, for which we gave a few thousand data points, and they work. So the idea was that you can decorate supercells in different way with this aluminum, gallium, and indium, and you have different formation energies, band gaps, and so on. So when we applied this diagnostic, so this subgroup discovery diagnostic, to different models that were identified with models that are among the best, those that won the competition actually, we found that so we gave some features to browse to the subgroup discovery that importantly are common to all models, in the sense that this is a way to represent the materials that is independent of the way the particular machine learning is representing the materials in order to train their own model. So the result is that, in particular for this so-called many-body tensor representation, I will not go into detail, we have a remarkable reduction of error in a subset of materials that are identified by these kind of macroscopic features. So whenever you get a data point, you know whether you belong or not to this class. So you know whether you will get a small error or not. So this is a kind of new way to analyze machine learning models and trying to get the best out of them, and also to understand what's going on. For example, you see that all the models seem to prefer small gamma angles. So this is in the supercell, one of the angles. So apparently, when this angle is actually wide, all the models have much more problems. So one might want to investigate what happens there. And this is a kind of spotlight that tells you, well, okay, there is a problem there, probably. Maybe you have to improve your descriptor for your model when these angles become large. Okay, now a few words on reproducibility. So we have been talking, I have been talking about data science, and I hope everybody agrees that is a big resource for the future. The data are a big resource, but we have to use them in the proper way. Use them in the proper way means that we also have to store them in the proper way and index them in the proper way. And this is related mainly to the idea of reproducibility, so that we store the data in such a way that we can find them again and reproduce what was done years before, months before, and probably and try to do something better. So in 2016, this big group of people published this FAIR guiding principles for data management and stewardship. So very nice acronym. FAIR stands for fundable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, also recyclable and repurposable. Where the idea is really that, that one has to attach metadata to the data in order to know exactly how they were produced, and they can be reused. They can be used in other contexts, interoperability, and they can be used to do, say, other machine learning analysis. So as in many cases in science, good ideas are around for a while. So even though the paper that framed the principle was 2016, the Novel Material Discovery Center of Excellence has had a FAIR storage since 2014. We didn't call it FAIR. So the Novel Material Discovery is a Center of Excellence whose coordinator is Matthias Schäfer from the Veri Tabanlı. So it's a consortium of many different research groups in Germany, Europe, and UK, and HPC centers also all around Europe. So the current status of this nomad laboratory, the way we call it, is based on what we call the repository that has, it is a collection of input and outputs from atomistic simulation codes as they come out from the calculation. Then we have a processing of the data in order to store the data in what we call the archive, where the data are represented in a code-independent way that more and more will be artificial intelligence ready. So this allows to do the inspection of the data. So you could see any published work that has uploaded the data on the repository, and then in the archive you can inspect what are the data, what was used for do the calculation and so on. But you could also reproduce the analysis that was done after the production of the data. In particular, we have what we call the artificial intelligence toolkit that is a web-based infrastructure based on Python notebook where people can run pre-existing notebooks that have some artificial intelligence analysis in it, and also produce new notebooks. And the idea here is to have tutorials on some textbook, but also some newly introduced artificial intelligence methods. And this is where reproducibility comes, but one can, and we are trying to do as much as possible, upload notebooks that go through some artificial intelligence training and exploitation that was done for some publication. So you can check all the steps, because when you do some machine learning, you have so many parameters that yes, you tell in the paper, but sometimes you forget to say something, a referee doesn't notice. Well, here you can put your hand on exactly the algorithm that we use, which parameters were used to obtain exactly the results. So if you go to this link here, you will find some examples of these notebooks, and we invite the community to upload their own notebooks. Okay, this is my last slide. There is a very long list of people to present all this outstanding work that I present here. And I want to recap by saying that I presented why artificial intelligence and machine learning is useful for science, material science in particular, beyond just fitting numbers. So we can have these interpretable maps of material properties using not so many data, and also have this diagnostic of learned models, as I shown with the Subgroup Discovery. So I thank you for your attention, and I stand here for questions. probably. Hello. To Alikram. Are there some questions? I don't know where to look. Maybe I should stop sharing. There were some raised hands.
Hello, Professor. Thank you very much for the very inspiring and absolutely amazing talk. I truly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks.
My question is regarding the extent to which you think we can go ahead with the current computational power which is available. I mean, is it possible to maybe potentially map all of the possibilities that material can possibly possess with similar methods that you have mentioned? Or maybe if not today, how much further does the computational power should be extended until we can actually get a good grasp of the entire world of possibilities which the amazing material can have? Thank you once again.
Thank you. Let me see if I understand the question. So certainly you may want to address different properties of materials at the same time, because typically, say if you want a good, I don't know, material for photovoltaic, you want some optical properties, maybe some electrical conductivity properties, but also you want that the material, say, does not contain radioactive elements or something like this. So you may have a cascade of requests, and you may want to find a material that satisfies all the properties at the same time. So this is one order of complexity. But I'm not so sure one would like to find a kind of, yeah, at the beginning I started with the periodic table, but something that encompasses all possible properties for all possible materials. I'm not so sure this is the target. Probably you would like to frame, let's say, a task. So you want a material for something that has a list of properties, and then you want to single out which one is the best. So I see that the computational complexity is more in the way you represent the material. In my case, I have this huge set of possibilities, these features, these basis functions. And this is where the computer time is spent, because it has to deal with large matrices and find the best solution. But having 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 properties, well, it scales essentially linearly with the properties, because you are not combinatorially searching all the possible properties. You're just finding something that is predicting well the different properties. So the computational explosion is in the complexity of the model. In my case, the number of features. In other cases, could be some other property of the artificial intelligence model. And also imagine that most likely you will not ever be searching over all possible materials. That probably is infinite. You are kind of focusing on some region of the material space. So I don't see much a problem of complexity, and therefore computational complexity arising from this part of analysis. It could more be a problem of having the good training data. So you would need to have the good experiment, the good theoretical material science model methods to find a good reference. This is where the complexity can scale up quite a lot. I don't know if this answered a bit Mubashir's question. Still, it has to be remembered that this artificial intelligence can be quite intensive. So nowadays we talk about exascale, and we can sort of exascale with artificial intelligence training and exploitation. But typically, but let's say, and these are typically massively parallel models, so they scale up quite nicely.
Any other questions?
Can I ask?
Please, go ahead.
Primarily, thank you so much for presentation. I learned AI, chemical molecules, atoms, relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Can I find a new element for use molecules, atoms, elements for this method?
You mean a new chemical element?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let me put it this way. So the chemical elements cannot have, say, fractional atomic number, right? So from hydrogen until, I don't know exactly where we are now, but I say Z equal 100 and something, we have filled in. I can imagine that one can extrapolate atomic properties and say maybe there is an element with Z equal 150 that fits best, but this would be very daring. So I don't, until now we have not thought about new chemical elements. What we typically are after are complex materials, say with so it could be binary, say ternaries, quaternaries materials with large superset, or even materials with more components like the tetrabromide that I've shown, in which you have compositions. I mean, if you go to 3, 4, 5 different chemical species, the number of possible stoichiometries is huge, almost infinite. So if you have a method that tells you, look into this area of compositions, and you will find a good material, this is more the direction I think this kind of methodologies can help us. So predicting unsuspected stoichiometries with known elements. I really never thought about new elements, despite what Iron Man has shown in the theaters. Yeah. Just imagine when people discovered, say, novel superconductors, they went to some kind of compositions that nobody has ever thought before. That was again sort of trial and error, guided intuition, guided trial and error. And imagine that now you could do this more systematically, because you can computationally explore a huge compositional space that would be impossible to do experimentally or with high-level ab initio methods, because it would be too expensive. So that's more or less
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, please?
I see Sena Melis Kaleli in the chat.
Yeah. Also I am not able to unmute myself. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for this great presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to first introduce myself. I'm a third grade student from Middle East Technical University, and my department is civil engineering. Although this is the fact, I'm really curious about the world's greatest problems, and I think they all once a transdisciplinary approach rather than interdisciplinary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why what I focus on nowadays, I wanted to ask that how we can use machine learning and this artificial intelligence on that kind of problems. For example, I was just thinking on the problem of the waste management. Maybe we can have a system or new infrastructure in the cities that we can maybe arrange the this waste and classify them like the plastic and the glass or the other stuff, because it's like the problem is that we can have that kind of huge deposits on the streets or in the cities. That's why maybe we can have a one tank or deposit as like we have now, and then maybe with like using the fluid mechanics principles and the machine learning, maybe we can just then use this whole stuff to maybe classify them and then recycle them, whatever. But when I think about it, I'm not sure how we can do this in terms of this new technology. Maybe like the problem, I just wanted to know how can I do it, and firstly, how can I pursue this in terms of like having knowledge on it.
Mm-hmm.
The start point that I'm interested in.
Okay, thanks for the question. It's very general and broad. Let's say from a very kind of distant perspective, machine learning, or in general artificial intelligence, is trying to find patterns in data, right? So you typically, so you have to start with data for sure that are tabulated and indexed in some way. And then you have, let's say, typically some classification, as you were describing for your waste management. What machine learning does that typically the human cannot is to kind of find representations such that one can predict, say, the classification of some target value, or even just notice that some data are similar, data points are similar, more similar among themselves than others are among themselves, and so on, or that you don't need so many parameters to describe your data points, but much fewer. So there are very different techniques in artificial intelligence and specifically machine learning to address the problem. And typically you have first to frame exactly what you want. So if you have some, say, data points for which you know your classification, so if this is good or not for some purpose, or if there is some property that is high or low and so on, probably you would use what is called supervised learning. That is a big class part I presented today, but is much wider. If you want just to find which data look alike, use what's called unsupervised learning, and more. So you the starting point, I think, is some good introductory course in say machine learning. So let's frame to machine learning instead of being a bit wider in artificial intelligence, in order to see a little bit what kind of different problems are addressed, and then you can think if what you have in mind can be framed in one of these in these classes. So I don't know if your university has these kind of courses. My experience is that online you can find very good material. So I can be more specific now. I should go a little bit through my notes. If you want, just email me and I can give you some more information.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? We can still take a couple of short questions, please. Yeah, Luca?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can stop here. And thank you very much, you, for this very exciting talk.
Thank you.
Indeed, I want to also emphasize that Professor Luca Ghiringhelli was one of the speakers at our this year summer school on machine learning and material science. But unfortunately, because of this coronavirus, we had to postpone this school for the next summer. So I strongly believe that next summer we will come together at this school, and then all our students and participants will have to ask face-to-face questions and discussions these very, very modern and exciting topics in interdisciplinary or related area of modern science or technology.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I really count on being able to come next summer.
Yeah,
because I think I like the place, and because then it means the pandemic is
yeah,
much less serious. And then yeah, so if people want to get to me, they can find easily my email at the Fritz Haber, and just send me.
Yes, thank you very much. I think people can ask you through email some interested questions.
Yeah.
So indeed, our students in Turkey a little bit shy always. They want to ask questions, but sometimes they are shy. But they can email you. They can email you and ask these questions.
Written is easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks a lot once again. See you soon. As soon as Corona settles down away.
Okay. I'm looking forward.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.